Hi, greetings. It's me, Dr. Paul Gerhardt, and today I want to talk about formal negotiating. Now, if you've watched other videos, you know that I'm giving a basic overview of things that you should be considering in the process of selling. And there are a lot of different categories in this series of videos that might help you be more effective if you are in sales. But not only if you're just in sales, but in everyday life, we're always doing things related to the skills that people who are in the sales profession are practicing every single day. And just like any other skill, the more you practice things, the better you get at them. And we don't always know what we don't know. And so this video on formal negotiating kind of gives you some things to think about to help you be more effective. Think about it. You've probably done negotiating with parents, friends, bosses throughout your whole life. And it doesn't seem that too much of a difficult deal, but if you want to be more effective in having a life that you truly love, especially if you're in sales, then you really have to know what it is that you don't know. And so this video, I've developed a list of topics for you to be thinking about as it relates to formal negotiating. So we'll talk about what negotiating really is. And sometimes it's appropriate in selling and sometimes it's not. We'll talk about things that can be negotiated and some things can't be negotiated. And then, just like any good strategy, you have to really be able to plan things out. And knowing what to plan for really is the key of successful negotiation. Ultimately, as you've probably heard me say if you've watched other videos, things have got to really be a win-win. And that means a win for you, but also a win for the buyer or the other person involved in negotiation. So you have to make sure that you realize that it takes two people to have a negotiation minimally. And very often people are negotiating in teams. And setting a professional tone for that negotiation is important. And the people involved all have the power to influence other people's way of being. And that really is important. So there's always got to be an open-mindedness for give and take on both sides. And being able to facilitate conversations or statements that help guide people to keep the conversation friendly and positive and productive is really, really important. So let's ask the basic question. What exactly is negotiation and what are the areas of potential conflict? So, negotiation really is a bargaining process through which buyers and sellers resolve areas of conflict and arrive at agreements. Simple enough. So some areas of conflict could be either minor or major. Minor issues could be things like who should attend future meetings. Usually decisions aren't made in the first initial meeting if it really is a big deal. And then major issues could include cost per unit and exclusive purchase agreements. These are things that may take people at different levels of the organization to evaluate. And so really understanding who from your organization could best help be able to make those decisions. So the opposite of win-win negotiating is win-lose negotiations. And very often people are skilled because they practice it all the time at win-lose negotiation. That means they have to win and you have to lose. And that takes a paradigm shift to get them over to it has to be a win-win for both parties. So win-lose negotiation is simply negotiation attempts to win all the major concessions and then triumph over the opponent. And this is what we learn and model in competitive sports. I mean, you can't have both teams have a win-win in any sports agreement. One team has to win over the other team. Win-win negotiating, the negotiator attempts to secure an agreement that satisfies both parties. And that really takes a lot of skill. It takes a lot of listening and a lot of understanding both parties' perspectives in order to help create that win-win situation. So the best negotiators really are smart. So let's talk about negotiation versus non-negotiation selling. Regular sale calls are constrained and they don't open change to negotiation. These are things where the regular processes are taking place and then there's an instant sale made and people know what the expectations are. Negotiations differ from regular sale calls because they're usually more intensive in the planning process, and usually a larger number of people are involved from the selling firm. Formal negotiations involve very large or important prospective buyers, so the people involved matter. Items negotiated between buyers and sellers. So inventory levels the buyer must maintain. Inventory levels the seller must keep on hand to be able to restock the buyer quickly. Details about design of the product or service. Very often sellers will create web pages to help sell the product better if they're going to a reseller. How the product will be manufactured, the specifications, is something that can be negotiated. And display allowances for resellers. So each of these are different variables that relate to different types of situations. Advertising allowances, an amount of advertising that the seller does. Sales promotion within the channel of the distribution. Delivery terms and conditions. And then the retail and wholesale pricing points for resellers. So it really is important to recognize what your company can do and what it can't do, and then that's the preparation, and then being able to have those conversations. And you might be able to facilitate those conversations by bringing up each of those topics because you've got a detailed agenda and list that you're going through that helps make the process of negotiation well. So what are the characteristics of good negotiation? Well, some factors affecting successful negotiation, like the situation, the parties involved, and then cultural differences. So every organization has a particular culture, and then there are other types of culture where it could have to do with people's cultural background. Physically, maybe you're negotiating with people from other countries, or you're negotiating people from a subculture within the United States. So all of those things matter. Here are some traits necessary to successfully negotiate. Patience, patience, patience. So you have to be willing to be patient, to listen and endure the process. Most things worth waiting for really are worth being patient for. So be willing to take risks and be willing to tolerate ambiguity. Listen, try to understand, really are the best characteristics for good negotiation. Poor negotiations, there's a lot of fear involved, and it's the fear of conflict and having closed-mindedness or being unorganized or working with people who are not honest. So you have to kind of model honesty. You can't call people on lying, but you can let them know that in certain ways that they're not being very effective. Sometimes people are just downright belligerent. So being able to recognize that you can affect the way that people are being by the way you handle yourself. So in planning for a negotiation session, you have to prepare yourself emotionally for the stress that will occur. I do a lot of visualization and recognizing that things don't always go right, but our minds have a way of being able to take worst case scenarios. So be aware of most of the times things will go a lot better than your worst case scenario. When location can be a real factor. So if it's a big item that you are negotiating on, it really is best to make sure that it's a neutral site that's not owned by either party. Make sure that it's quiet, and so there will be nothing around to distract both teams. They will have undivided attention for the negotiation process. And that remember that online negotiations affect behaviors of the negotiations. So sometimes face-to-face, in person can work a lot better than online. Time allotment matters. Have to be able to negotiate the objectives and recognize the extent in which both sides desire a win-win session. And so you kind of have to facilitate that with win-win language. Negotiation objectives. Remember that power is a critical element in developing objectives. Make concessions in negotiating the meeting. Target position, on what a company hopes to achieve at the negotiation session. And then you have to recognize your minimum level, the absolute minimum level of acceptance. And that really should be a team thing. So the other side is going to have a minimum position too. So you have to kind of be aware of what that looks like and go into it with a target position, what you hope to achieve, and a minimum position. And you have to give an opening position. So this will be the initial proposal, which should reflect a higher expectation than the target position to allow concessions. So always give an opening that's high and expect that it's going to be negotiated lower. Be supported with solid information. So you have to do your homework and identify and discuss issues that could be raised beforehand. So I like to think of negotiations as playing chess. So you always have to be aware of the rules of the game, who's involved, how people can move, and decisions they might make, and what decisions you might make. Recognize what the seller's minimum price is, or the buyer's opening price, and the seller's target price, and the seller's opening price. And you have to kind of fill in the blank and recognize where maximum minimums are. And then you need to do adaptive planning, develop alternative paths that reach the same goal. So if they say this, then you're going to do this. And if they do this, then you have to do this. But you ultimately need to recognize where your goal is. You may have a brainstorming session. This is a meeting in which people are allowed to creatively explore various methods for achieving goals. And finally, you have to recognize that if you've got a team, or they have a team, there are going to be advantages and disadvantages. Some advantages of having a team is people can become more creative than one person with one background. And members can help one another reduce the chances of making mistakes. You have a support system that are there listening and being able to guide the conversations. Some of the disadvantages of having a team is more participants involved. It takes more time to reach an agreement, and different opinions make the seller's team appear disorganized. So you have to have the right people on the team. So let's talk about team selection and management. The seller's team should be equal to the buyer's team in size. So can you imagine any team going up where one team had more members than another team? So you have to be able to have balance. Sessions should have defined roles. So being able to outline what's going to take place. The team leader should manage the actual negotiation session. So there should be one person that's managing the negotiation. There should be established rules and signals to communicate with one another, and practice to understand respective roles. So very effective selling, especially for long-term relationships, really has to have a plan in place. Some people that you might have on your negotiating team is the salesperson, field sales manager, national sales manager or vice president of sales, national account sales manager, marketing department, senior executives, product managers, staff, chief executive or officer or the president, manufacturing executives, staff, purchasing executives and staff, accounting and finance executives and staff, information technology executive and staff, training executives and staff, outside consultants. So there's a lot of different people that could bring value to the negotiations. So who you have at the table really matters. So also we have to understand individual buyer patterns. And I know that I continue to talk about this, but you really have to know who the buyer is. And the team leader needs to consider the personality style of each member of both teams. And so you have to be really good at knowing what to look for. Categorize team members on the dimensions of assertiveness and responsive. Remember, we talked about social styles. There are analyticals, amiables, expressives, and drivers. And I cannot stress enough, if you haven't seen the video on social styles, go back and look at it and refresh it. It's about looking at levels of assertiveness and responsiveness and being able to identify who the analyticals, amiables, and expressives and drivers are, so that you can learn to adapt accordingly, get them the right information the right way. Then there needs to be an understanding conflict handling behaviors. And so essentially, you look at levels of assertiveness and cooperativeness and be able to adjust yourself ultimately. When negotiating, compromising really is key to success. But being able to identify as a person being competing, that's assertive and uncooperative, is a person being avoiding, that's uncooperative and unassertive, being collaborating, which is ultimately the way you want to get them to be, which is assertive and cooperative, or accommodating, which is unassertive but cooperative. So be able to look at levels of assertiveness and cooperativeness in order to be able to handle conflict behaviors effectively. You know, competing mode, assertive and uncooperative, pursuing their own goals and objectives at the expense of the other party. In the accommodating mode, they're unassertive and highly cooperative, focus on the needs and desires of the other party. Avoiding mode refers to individuals who do not attempt to fulfill their own needs and the needs of others, do not strive for win-win agreements or any agreement. And then compromising mode, these people apply to the people in the middle in terms of cooperativeness and assertiveness, and they attempt to arrive at win-win solutions. So ultimately, you want to find a solution and bring people into a compromising mode. So you kind of have to model that, and you kind of have to help coach them to getting to be in that mode. The collaborating mode, individuals who are both assertive and cooperative. They seek to maximize satisfaction of both parties. They seek to reach truly win-win solutions and have motivation, skill, and determination to really dig into an issue or the problem and then explore all possible solutions. So sometimes people may be skilled negotiators and they may practice different tactics or sneak attacks. And so be aware that ambush negotiation and sneaking tactics really are win-lose negotiations, and win-lose means it really is a lose. So be aware of when people are doing things that could be a lose-lose situation. You have to really establish a win-win environment. That means really be assertive in showing that you want it to be a win for them, but it also has to be a win for you. You can do this by preparing an agenda, listing what will be discussed and then the sequence of things that will be discussed. The general guidelines, listening carefully, keeping track of issues discussed and resolved, and then considering cultural differences too. Sometimes people practice good guy, bad guy routine, you know, and that really has its advantages and disadvantages. You know, the bad guy, the negotiator, makes all sorts of outlandish statements and requests, but then the good guy comes in and offers a win-win solution by presenting a lower demand. Very often people will come right at you and lowball, when one party intentionally underestimates or understates the costs. And so you have to kind of be aware of lowballing techniques. It works. Dealing with win-lose negotiators, used in buyer-seller negotiations in industrial situations. The best response is just to say no. Underscore the importance of getting signatures on contracts and agreements as soon as possible. Without a signature, it's not official. And then be aware that after the negotiation is done, the buyer may come back and want extra small add-on requests, and we call this nibbling. And that is also a variation of lowballing. Be aware that sometimes win-lose negotiators will practice having emotional outbursts, and it's really used to get people to feel uncomfortable and to give in to their demands. Budget limitation tactic or budget bogey, claims of budget ceilings employed to try to get a lower price. We don't have the money for that. That's not in our budget. And it's the best defense to do your homework before going into the negotiation. Be aware of what their position is. Browbeating often happens, and this is an attempt to alter the selling team's enthusiasm and self-respect. So beating people up, essentially. Related to that is negotiation jiu-jitsu. If a salesperson steps away from the opponent's attack and directs the opponent back to the issues being discussed. And the goal is to calm the buyer while helping the seller maintain control of his or her own emotions. Very often you have to detach yourself, give enough time to think about the issue, acknowledge their position, and then respond. Create a favorable climate for response, really showing that you're listening to them. Build a bridge, and don't ever threaten anybody. Sometimes you can warn people about how you feel the situation, but never make threats. Win-lose tactics, Sometimes people will do different things to limit their authority, or throw a red herring, bringing out a minor point to distract the other side from considering the main issue. Trial balloons are things to consider. Floating out an idea without really offering it as a concession or agreement, or a goal that is really the goal to just get information. Total silence by the buyer after you make an offer. So, sometimes people need to think, but do recognize that sometimes people will be silent to see if you'll make a different offer. So concession is something to consider. One of the involved party agrees to change a position in some fashion. Here's some guidelines to make a concession effective. Never make a concession unless all of the buyer's demands and opening positions are known. So you really have to listen and be aware of what their opening position is. And two, given in return, and do not feel guilty about receiving a concession. So make sure that you're aware of all of the things involved before you speak. Concessions gradually decrease in size, so be aware of that. Don't be afraid to say no. All concessions are offered tentative until the final agreement is reached and signed. So nothing is a done deal. Everything out there that's been put out there can be changed until things are signed. Be confident in a secure position and do not give concessions carelessly. Do not accept the buyer's first attempt at a concession unless, of course, it really meets your high demand, and usually it won't. So be aware of the negotiation process and make it to be effective for you. Help the buyer to see the value of any concessions agreed to. So help them recognize that they're making good decisions. Negotiate without preconceived notions, so have an open mind. When a mistake is made, tell the buyer and begin negotiating that issue again. Take a step back. I made a mistake. I apologize. This is what I should have said, or this is what I should have done. Check out the offer to see how it compares to the target position before agreeing to it. So really be aware of what your target is, and is it something that you can live with. Remain non-committal when a customer asks for a bottom line price. So don't just give them your bottom line price. You have to kind of be able to talk about the process a little bit more and be aware of all the things that they have to share first. Know when to stop and use silence effectively. So silence is an amazing tool that you can use, especially when you've planned things out well. Alright, so I've talked a lot about the negotiation process and things that you should consider. I encourage you to watch this video over again if you are going to get into planning out a formal negotiations settlement. Really, ultimately, you want to be aware of where you're low and where you're high, where your target is, and be aware of what they can give and what they can't give too. And so being prepared, having a strategy, remember it's a game of chess. You get to help set the tone. Being aware of their social styles really matters because you can adjust accordingly. So be smart, look for win-win situations. What you have to recognize, what you have to offer really will have value to them. If you understand it and can be able to talk about the value and be able to know what you can negotiate with and not negotiate with, will really help keep things moving and help create a win-win outcome. Thank you so much for your valuable time. I truly appreciate it, and I hope that you have a great day, because only you get to choose how you feel about it. I'm Dr. Paul Gerhardt.